Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Season 3, Episode 1, The Crystal Empire, Part 1. This is the episode in which they introduce the Crystal Empire for the first time, along with King Sombra, and Twilight and crew go north to the frozen west in order to have a test, or at least that's what Twilight thinks it is, in order to save them, blah, 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 blah. Now, I think you get the idea of the episode. I actually have a lot to talk about today for this one, so we're just going to kind of dive right into it. First of all, let's go ahead and continue to say, like, what, Sierra Mike? Let's start by saying that this is, to date, I'd say, one of the best cold opens we've seen so far on the show. It's very short, but it's very attention-catching, and it kind of relies on knowledge of the show in order to really operate properly. Da-da-da-da-da. It has returned. Go, get Shining Armor and Cadence immediately. Twilight, I need your help immediately. Cut to credits. Very quick and very efficient way of getting your attention, which is exactly what a proper cold open should do. So, good stuff, good stuff. And naturally, you'll notice that Celestia, who is in a significant hurry here, immediately calls the local superhero. Immediately calls Twilight and her group. No, I would say that this is probably officially the point in time at which Twilight and group basically start being treated as superheroes. I don't actually mind that, really, but I'm okay. I'm okay with it. I'm okay with the concept. It's just, this is also kind of their origin story in a weird way, which we'll get to in just a minute. Yeah, let's get Batman on the red phone, exactly. So, we see we cut to Twilight, the next thing that happens. We cut to Twilight, and she's in her library in full-on panic mode, like you do. I want to point out something really quick. You'll notice that Spike is completely blasé about everything, right? Spike's just like, okay, yep, nope. He's got the bag for the feathers immediately. He's got the books immediately. This is a Tuesday for him. Yeah, it's this time again. He knows her, and he's been around her long enough that he's just like, yeah, okay, sure, whatever. I only point that out because it sure serves as interesting contrast to her supposed friends, the rest of the main six, who are just standing there kind of looking at each other and, making glances and being like, Whereas Spike is like, yeah, okay. I only point that out because this is yet more fuel to the fire for the theory I've had for a while that they are still in the process of becoming actual friends, a process that didn't even start until the beginning of Season 2. And of course, it's not like you just become friends, so it's kind of a gradual thing, which is why I phrase it that way. Anywho, so we have a new crystal pane of Shining and Cadence from the last episode, which is a continuity counter. And I love the fact that Luna is the one who has doubts in Twilight and her capacity. Because this makes sense. After all, Celestia is the one who basically raised her and trained her, so Celestia is the one who knows her better. And Luna is the one who is most, how do I phrase this? Most familiar with self-doubt. This will actually become the basis of an entire episode later on, and has already been the basis of an entire episode prior to now. Luna is someone who already fully understands the concept of the fact that, things might not go well, and things might not work out, and... Interesting reflection on this. I actually have something else to say, but before I move forward, I want to mention that Celestia... Well, Celestia says, you must do this, and Twilight hesitates for, like, a second. Looks down, and is like, okay, I got this. Then she goes out, and then she sees Luna. Luna says nothing. Luna's just looking down at her like this, with a doubting glare, right? And that is the moment Twilight actually doubts herself. And it is Celestia who says, no, you will. But what if, no, you will? But no. Now, I also think that what Celestia does here is Nah. But I want to cover that more in episode 2 because it's actually going to be more relevant in episode 2. So let's just leave that one at the sideline for right now. You could also say that Celestia is more, and I don't mean either of these as an insult, but Celestia is more built into faith, having faith that things can work out and believing in someone, whereas Luna is far more pragmatic as someone who has lost faith both in her sister and herself more than once. So, I swear to God, if you quote Enterprise at me, I will actually kill you. Orbital strike, you won't even see it coming. You'll be walking out at the barbecue, gone. Then you'll be in Shadowlands being like, what the heck? So, sorry, getting back to my point. Faith, I talked about Luna, I talked about the doubt, I talked about the friend, I talked about the superhero thing. What I really want to talk about is the Crystal Empire. First of all, I find the very existence of something like the Crystal Empire fascinating. But in order to properly talk about the Crystal Empire, I have to really talk about the Crystal Ponies. And I have a new theory. So she says flat out in the episode that the Crystal Empire acts as a bit of a refracting prism, right? Whatever's there, it distributes out the rest of Equestria, right? So if it's bad, it's bad. If it's good, it's good. Cool. I'm going to get back to that in a second, because what I want to talk about first is the Crystal Ponies, who I think they're unique. Now, this is just a theory, a lore theory, but after watching this episode, I am now 100% convinced that they are, to put it as nicely as possible, they don't really have what I would call cores of their own. Do you have a link, Act, off the top of your head? Because I can't picture it off the top of my head. In other words, the Crystal Ponies don't feel anything of themselves, per se. Rather, they reflect and magnify whatever is felt around them or felt upon them. Now, my first bit of evidence for this was the fact that the Crystal Empire's very nature. But then I started thinking about it, and I hate to skip ahead, but there's also the fact that in the future, there's an episode in which they have something called the Crystalling, where they spread love and happiness and light, and it hits the whole empire because of someone else who is not a Crystal Pony who has a beautiful baby child, and that kind of gets to them. Or I could also point out the fact that what we see both in this episode and in a future episode, that when they have... that looks pretty cool. I mean, it's got the 6 elements there, so I'm with it. I don't have anything else to say about it other than the obvious act, I'm afraid. We see here and in a future episode that when King Sombra is there, they basically feel the emotions that he personifies. And I'll talk about Sombra in a minute, so let's shelve that one for now. And we see in this episode, and several instances of them specifically feeling things that they're only feeling because of the fact that someone around them is feeling the same thing. What I'm trying to get at is in every instance of this episode, the Crystal Ponies feel nothing of themselves. They only reflect, or refract, like a prism, the light that is put on them from someone else. Now, I don't know how severely that affects. It's entirely possible that I'm going a little bit too far with the theory crafting. But even if they have the ability to feel amongst themselves, it is very obvious that the intent is that they are also serve as reflectors for other people's emotions. Hence their position as the Crystal Heart thing, which will come up in episode 2, and the Crystal Empire's position within Equestria as a whole. Now, all of this is fascinating in its own way. But it also it's a nice way to differentiate them from other ponies, because it helps Crystal Ponies to be separate from Earth and Unicorn and Pegasi. It also makes them kind of automatically important to basically the entire rest of the kingdom. We were talking semi-jokingly, and not really jokingly, about the idea of a Mario 4X game, in which one of the concepts is that you can steal Princess Peach, and that would have a large effect on both the stealer and the stealee. Now, the idea here is that... I'm sorry this is a weird parallel, but the point is, it suddenly makes the Crystal Empire substantially more important for the rest of Equestria, more so than it otherwise would be, because of the fact that it has such a magnifying effect on whatever's being pushed through it. I wouldn't call it a beacon of harmony. Again, I don't think anything really originates there. I think it's more like this is the place that magnifies. I mean, I hate to keep going back to the prism analogy, but it's the friggin' what do you want from me? It's the Crystal Empire. By the way, Chrism, not Prism. God, I can't talk right now. I am so tired. Prism, not Chrism. Anyways. I mean, you've held up a gem and put a light through it, right? I know the feeling, Ethel. I'm sorry. Or like just a magnifier, right? And yeah, as Weods points out, and has pointed out before, we know that there is a great deal of, for lack of a better way to put it, magic dependence within pony kind. Now, there's a bunch of connecting points here, and I'm trying to address them bit by bit, and I'm trying to be logical in my order of talking, so please forgive me if I'm screwing up here. I was actually insulted just recently by being told that my rumination format is incredibly unprofessional because I have notes in front of me, and I don't put game footage behind me. Huh. Anyways, more fuel to the fire. We should just cancel the ruminations entirely. Now, the idea of its significance within the pattern makes a degree of sense, especially if you consider its position. So, let's get into theory crafting a little bit, shall we? The Crystal Empire is in the Frozen North area. The Frozen North area is a place where we know Wendigos happen to be around, and we know that the Frozen North itself and Wendigos themselves, at least in part, form a degree of entropy, that is to say, forced stagnation. So it would make a lot of sense to anchor the pattern of harmony that Equestria is built upon in that place where it needs it the most, right? Like you need to have the strongest defenses where you're getting hit the hardest. And in this case we're speaking on a metaphysical sense, but it's still true. My theory is that the Crystal Empire, which is actually more like a city, but whatever, the Crystal Empire was actually built specifically by that original trio, specifically to originally set up this harmonic frequency, and then serve as a beacon to help the rest of Equestria. Yeah, city-state is a better way to put it. Oh, no kidding, Dream Whisperer. Now, we also... God dang it, I need new headphones. That's really frustrating. Do I have a spare here? I don't think I do I? Possible act. I suppose I should also talk about Sombra at some point. I keep kind of dodging around talking about him because I've got a bunch to say about him. But anyways, I'm getting a little bit off track, so let me rewind here. So I mentioned their idea as a magnifier in the pattern, like a prism, like a crystal, and the crystal ponies themselves, who themselves serve as magnifiers. This leads us to Sombra. Now, I was going to save more of my Sombra talk for the second episode. I think we're okay. I want to mention at least one thing about Sombra here. I've heard a bunch of theories about Sombra, and I myself have theory crafted about him a bit. But my theory about him is actually extremely basic. So, thematically, he's Sauron. Now, I want to explain that a little bit, because I don't mean he's literally Sauron, because anybody who knows Lord of the Rings lore knows that there's actually a hell of a backstory to, Sauron the Deceiver. But what I mean thematically is that he is a villain who is specifically absent characterization. He is specifically a, what I usually refer to as a hurricane villain. Something that is intended to be a force of nature rather than an actual individual. And I actually have a theory about why that is. Because you'll notice that he doesn't serve as a prism, and he, in fact, by all accounts, does not appear to be a crystal pony at all. I think he came to the Crystal Empire and then took it. Because what he had is something that was basically something that all the crystal ponies were extremely weak to. Very strong emotions. In fact, they specifically call out the emotions he is exemplified several times. They are hatred, fear, and despair. And we'll notice the crystal ponies, as they're walking around at the beginning, despite the fact that they've been freed, which we'll talk about that in a second, they're all... I'm sorry, they're literally physically dulled. They are physically dulled because of how much they are still affected by that curse, by having been under his control. Several of them mentioned that they literally can't even remember anything before Sombra's time, and they don't want to remember what it was like under Sombra's rule. And as they introduce the fair, some of them start to light up and like, oh god, and their coat returns to a slightly more normal vein, and, you know, blah, 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 blah. And by the way, I want to mention something as an aside. Some time ago, a couple months ago, I say at this point, I did a deep dive into the MLP comics and decided to not reference them when it came to this Streaminations series. And the reason why is because of the same reason that I don't reference the Star Trek 2009 comic when it comes to the Picard show. Now, I suppose I should explain that, so give me a moment here. When the 2009 movie was coming out, the Star Trek 2009 movie, there was actually a lead-up comic that was written for it, which explained the build-up. Now, that was cool, and at the time, it was canon. It has since been erased from continuity. And that's exactly why I'm going to be ignoring the MLP comics, because near as I can tell, whenever they specifically write any given episode, they go out of their way, or excuse me, any given issue, they go out of the way to make it canon, and yet, frequently and repeatedly, it kind of gets tossed out the window when it comes to both the comics and the show. So, neat. Decent stuff. I've read quite a few of them. They're decent, but not really relevant for the theory crafting here. It's kind of like talking about a Star Trek book when it comes to talking about a Star Trek show. It's fun to share the perspective, but it's not actually canon, and therefore is not something we can consider, right? I wanted to mention that because I know the Crystal Empire and Sombra both come up quite a bit in the comics. Never mind the Wastelands and the whole... that also came up last week with Chrysalis, who didn't even get a name in the episode that she was introduced in. Anyways. So... Sombra, Crystal Ponies, Crystal Empire. All of this, by the way, is just fantastic world building, can I just say? Which brings me to my next point. And I know we've kind of been jumping around the episode to discuss it, but let's rewind back to when Twilight is given this mission. Even though it could be argued... I actually have no idea, Subicum. Even though it could be argued, I actually think that this is the episode deliberately, that is to say the series, deliberately trying to up the stakes for basically the first time. Oh, you could argue that they've saved Equestria more than once, and that is certainly a debatable factor. However, this is something a little heavier. Twilight even flat out says, I don't know how I could possibly help an entire empire. And this is also something that she's being told to do basically without... Yeah. This time they're doing it without the elements of harmony, and they're doing it without the backing of Celestia and Luna. You guys got to go and deal with this on your own. And I'm kind of with that. And I do think it helps to add to the overall feel and vibe of what they're going with here. Why is there a little spike with a sword? Anyways. I know. Why isn't there a spike with a sword? You'll forgive me for kind of going on and on and on of it, but like I said, we have a lot to talk about here, because the Crystal Empire and the nature of the Crystal Ponies is actually fascinating for the construction of the world building, and this goes all the way back to the pattern, which I've talked about a few dozen times. Which leads me to a question. There's this bit where Celestia has this little crystal, a dark crystal, wah-wah, and she has this dark crystal. She puts it out, and she projects light and harmony and peace through it. And then she projects, in her own words, hatred and fear through it, which actually make the dark, the black crystals, the cursed crystals, show up. Yeah, this is basically the first time we see this type of dark magic on camera. Everything up until this point hasn't actually been, as weird as this may sound, evil. Luna, while possessed, was something else, and that didn't really qualify. And Discord's Discord, and we'll talk more about him going forward. This is actually dark magic, and this is something that will be coming up in the future as well. Which brings me up to my next big question. Was that an illusion? Or can Celestia actually cast dark magic? Enjoy food, Lord Haramont, and hello, Jinkamio. Now, regardless of whether she... let me just say that I think she can cast dark magic. I want to say... I want to toss something in here. I think she does understand hatred and fear. I think she doesn't feel it. I think it's not something that's an everyday part of her life. But I think she, like most people, does understand what those darker and less pleasant emotions are like. And so all she has to do for that tiny moment is actually project those buried, hidden away feelings. Which brings me to my point. I think that when she put the dark magic into the crystal, that whatever she was thinking in that moment was genuine. Which, to me, adds a little bit of extra characterization to her and helps increase my opinion of her as a character, as weird as that may sound. And yeah, obviously, whenever she looks up at the moon, this is the kind of thing that would come into her mind. This is going to sound like a weird parallel, but it reminds me of Fluttershy. You'll notice in this episode, Fluttershy actually gets frustrated and pissed off, and then pulls herself back. You caught that, right? Which, by the way, I'm going to count as a continuity counter, because she started to be assertive, just like in that episode I didn't care for, and then withdrew and was like, no, I'm sorry. Because we as people tend to have parts of ourselves we're not proud of. I'll go ahead and share mine, my temper. I hate my temper. I feel like I have no control over it, and I have spent so much of my life constantly trying to lock it down and away into a deep, dark corner so it never affects me, because in my mind, that's not me. Right? Now, you don't have to share whatever it is for you, or if you're aware of it at all, but I'm sure at least some of you can relate to the concept of having a part of yourself that you aren't proud of, or don't even really think of as a part of yourself. Fluttershy is probably horrified at the thought of actually getting angry at someone and attacking them, like she was on the verge of doing. Even though it's portrayed as a joke, we have already seen in an episode that that can be a serious thing for her. Which, of course, ties perfectly into Celestia, that she has to control herself, that she has to keep herself on lockdown, and make sure that that is down there. And we know with total certainty Luna has to do the same thing. The catch is Luna does it in an extremely unhealthy way, and that'll come up in her episode in the future. Because what Luna does is she constantly hates and chastises herself, and in the episode it magically goes stronger and threatens everything and blah blah blah. But ignoring that for a second, the metaphor there is very real. You know, you allow yourself to hate yourself for a part of yourself, for a mistake you've made, right? That'll cause issues going down the line. So, Imperial Star Destroyer asked about the villains thing. I kind of want to save that till next episode. Are you going to be here for covering part 2? Because I do want to talk about that with regards to Sombra in specific. Okay, cool. So let's don't let me forget, because I do want to talk about Sombra and the pattern. And I want to talk about that next episode. Okay, so... I love the way they portray King Sombra a lot. I love the way that they present him, both visually and audibly. He looks like a giant, morphic, shadowy cloud, and he literally sounds like a wolf. like a lonely winter wolf howling in the distance, which actually adds to his, well, normally I'd say inhuman nature, so I guess in pony nature? Does that work? It makes him seem less and less like a pony, like someone who actually is a part of the pattern. But like I said, we'll talk a little bit more about that next time. Either way, we definitely see that he is not normal. In fact, we only start to see his face at basically the very end of the episode, emerging as the shield finally goes down. Yeah, you can't bargain with a storm. That's exactly right, Rascor. And again, this is one of the reasons why I say that Sombra is more of a force of nature than an individual. We're playing called... Lol, we out. Very apropos, given the circumstances. Little touches. There's a lot of little touches in this episode I just want to call attention to a few of them really quickly. First of all, you can see how they are starting to become more friends, because there's this bit where Rarity is geeking out about how gorgeous this place is. And Rainbow and Applejack kind of poke fun at her a little bit. And it's done in a way that is very well written and very well acted, because what it basically means is it shows that they actually are cognizant of each other's personalities enough to lightly poke fun at their own little foibles, right? Rarity herself is like, oh, very funny, you know. Yeah, it's teasing. It's light, friendly teasing. Well, Aurora isn't here, so they're screwed from us. There's one of my favorite little touches is the fact that the Crystal Pony's eyes are different. Rather than the typical round iris, or whatever it's called, the little white speck, it's actually like a diamond or like a pentagon or whatever. It's got jagged edges, sharp lines inside. Very little touch, but I actually like those little touches. Like I said, I want to call those out. I mentioned the Fluttershy being assertive and pulling her health back. Pinkie Pie has her spy suit again. Fluttershy is wigged out by the Fluttershy suit, of course. But there's one other thing I wanted to call attention to, and that is Sunshine, Sunshine, Ladybug's awake. As I already mentioned, I love how they use that going forward between the two characters, and this is not the last time that's going to come up. So, by the way, I counted 4 continuity counters for this episode. I'll go ahead and update the local counter here. And by local, I mean the not local, the HUD, which is up to there. But there's one other tiny little thing I never actually noticed before. I want you guys to do me a favor at some point and rewatch the scene where, you know, Sunshine, Sunshine, Ladybug's awake. Like 2 bars of a Kingdom Hearts song play during that scene. Right before it gets interrupted by her having the headache with the force field, which also shows that she's directly maintaining the force field. Good visual presentation. Just interesting to think about. Basically, I'm guessing it's a reference, because that is clearly a Kingdom Hearts song. It's the town one. Whose name I something can't think of. All Traverse Town. It's Traverse Town. Anyways, so then we have another song. It's 2 songs this episode. You notice I didn't actually mention the first song, which is called The Failure Song, and the second song is called The Ballad of the Crystal Empire. This is pure impressions, but I get a weird feeling that from Season 3 onward, they really started to lean on the music side of the show. I'm not sure what I think of that. But going forward, episodes that have songs in them are going to start becoming more the norm and less the exception. And like I said, there's 2 songs in this episode. What do you guys think of that? Because, I don't know. I mean, obviously the quality of the song varies, and that's kind of the important thing. Do I know the composers? I could look that up, but no, would be the answer to your question. We do this, and then do this, and then do this. And skip forward to the Failure Song, which is right about here. A little further. Oh, it doesn't say. No, I have no idea who made it. Yeah, it wasn't supposed to be a musical show. I'll admit, and I mean, I watch a show about cartoon ponies, so what the hell, but I'll admit it weirds me out how much songs kind of became a thing going forward. Especially for the The Cutie Mark Crusaders, who I think have a song in basically every single one of their episodes. Again, it depends on the quality of the song. Some of the songs are actually quite good, in my opinion. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So another song plays. Like, we have to get this right. We can't get this wrong. You know, okay, cool. Song plays. Further evidence to what I mentioned earlier. Not only does their coat, I already mentioned this, their coat comes back as, you know, happiness is projected upon them as they see the fair. But in addendum to that, their memories start to come back as they start to get happier. Now, I want you to keep that in mind, because more than anything else, that indicates to me that them being depressed and unhappy is, for lack of a better way to put it, an aberration. Now, I know that sounds strange, but it's important to establish that kind of a thing when it comes to your fiction. Like, that's the sort of thing that you need to lay a bedrock for, especially a fiction as metaphysical as My Little Pony. Establishing that someone who is genuinely depressed and sad and afraid and in despair is not good is something that needs to be kind of showcased. And yeah, I agree, Sierra Mike. Unfortunately, we're not there yet. So. And then there's that curse, which brings me to the last thing I wanted to talk about. Actually, there's two things I wanted to talk about at the end. But anyways, the last thing I really wanted to talk about is the time skip. What do you think happened? Because there's two broad possibilities. Either they were sealed away for 1,000 years, or they jumped forward 1,000 years. Honestly, I'm leaning towards the jumped, personally. Because, yeah, we know time travel's a thing. We know curses are a thing. We know dark magic's a thing. We know that the whole Crystal Empire, the kingdom, vanished as it was basically the last spell Sombra cast, as he was being, ah! That's the first option, Ect. It could be sealed, or they could be jumped. It's up to you to decide, because near as I can tell, there's actually no real concrete information either way. Like, if they were sealed, then anyone going to find it wouldn't find it, right? So, And if they were sealed and in stasis, then they would have no knowledge or understanding of the fact that they were sealed. Right? If they jumped, then from their perspective, no actual time passed, and blah, blah. Would it actually matter? Not really. But I do have to say one thing, and I hate to disagree with you on this one, Baron. But the fact that is, if they were sealed or jumped forward, one way or another, from their perspective, no time has passed. Which means nobody was really cognizant of the fact that they have jumped forward 1,000 years. There's even a pony who specifically asks, has it really been 1,000 years? Which means that none of them, including Sombra, had any cognizance while they were being sealed. Or jumped forward. Lol, Shikor. Now, furthermore, to add on top of this, it also kind of helps to explain why... Personally, I like the jump forward idea, especially because, to me, not only does it line up better with the overall perspective, but it also... It adds a little bit to Sombra's not characterization, for lack of a better way to put it. So, if there was a jump, obviously Celestia and Luna would probably have sent people out to check it out, and periodically, I mean, other ponies, there's archaeology ponies, right? There's historian ponies. People would be like, where's the Crystal Empire? Now, yes, if it was sealed, they still couldn't have found it. However, if it suddenly appeared, to me, it just makes a little more sense that it's an obvious thing, because all of a sudden, bwong, and it's back, and everyone's like, whoa! And they pretty much immediately know that it's there because of such an impact of it jumping forward. Unless it's Dalaran, in which case, let's not get into that. or Dalaran, or Dalaran, or the other 15 ways to pronounce that. There's 3 A's in a row. There's so many ways to pronounce the letter A, and it's just ridiculous. I will admit it still makes perfect sense if they were sealed. Which leads me to one last point, and I think Raskor kind of touched on that there. It's entirely possible that he was sealed, and in his final spell, he flung them forward. So, it is actually within the possibility that it is both a seal and a time jump. This would then make Baron's theory make more sense, that he has actually been entrapped there for 1,000 years, freaking out and slowly dissolving, like Zemus, until it gets to the point when finally the Empire gets back out, and that allows him to latch onto something to break himself out. And he's having trouble because you'll notice in in episode 2, he starts to reform bit by bit more as the episode goes on until he's finally able to actually make a physical form and appear as a pony, which only happens right at the end of the episode. Sorry for skipping ahead. Different types of seals. Also, different power levels, to be completely blunt. I said I would talk more about... You guys keep wanting to talk about Sombra. Christ, people. I said I wouldn't talk about this future, but I do want to mention that we do see at least a little bit of Sombra's power level in this episode. It took 2 princesses to bring him down, and by that I mean seal him away last time. It took Celestia and Luna both to bring him down. And this time around, the combination of Cadence, who is also an Alicorn, as well as Shining Armor, who is really good at protection spells, are barely holding him off when he's not trying. So, we do see that he's... the episode does a good job of establishing the severity of threat that he is. Oh my gosh. I might actually be getting FF7 today. What do you know? I said it might show up today. Looks like I was right. We're still not streaming it till Friday. That's what you guys voted for. Well, the giant blizzard might have something to do with that, but I think if I was to theorycraft here, I would say that he... I know this is getting a little metaphoric, but think of Sombra as fear. Now, how do you defeat fear? Well, fear is actually really easy to defeat unless you let it get a foothold or let it sit there. Because fear is actually extremely difficult to defeat. Except when it's extremely easy to defeat. You see where I'm going with this. Fear is the kind of thing that just sits there. Back there. It's kind of, roaming about on the outside of this little bubble that you've put up for yourself to try and prevent it from getting in. And you already see where I'm going with this. To really tie this into less metaphoric sense, what Cadence is doing is not actually putting up a protective bubble over the Empire. I know it looks like that, but she and Shining both flat out state that what they're doing is they're not throwing up... Their shields are not at max. What she is doing is her love spell, a.k.a. the mind restoration spell, the mind heal on a large amount of crystal ponies who are suffering from severe PTSD from being literal slaves to hatred and despair. And yeah, Shining's actual spell doesn't work. We see that right towards the beginning. He gets curb stomped to the point where he can't even cast properly anymore. So... yeah, this is some fun stuff here. Because what she's doing is trying to force the love spell, force the heal onto the whole area, and the problem is it's not working. Now that makes perfect sense to me. It really does make perfect sense that it wouldn't work, for 3 big reasons. Reason number 1. She's trying to heal an entire city's worth of people. We see the Crystal Empire from a distance quite a bit. It's probably one of the largest cities we've seen in the entire show. There's a lot of ponies there. right? I mean, it makes a lot of sense that it would be that hard. And yeah, without any kind of amplifier. She's just herself trying to heal a few thousand ponies or however many there's there. So it makes sense that it would have substantially less impact than it would on, say, 1 or 2 ponies, which she usually does it up prior to. Second reason, what they have been through is very dark and very horrible. And as anybody with PTSD will tell you, that's not the kind of thing you just get over. Third point. The root cause hasn't been treated. And the root cause is Sombra. There's a reason I keep calling Sombra fear. Because the more I think of it, the more I theorycraft, the less I think Sombra is a pony at all. Or if he was a pony, he isn't anymore. That he has literally become an elemental or a force of nature, or whatever you actually want to refer to that as. And because the disease is still there, all she's doing is treating the symptoms. So, for those 3 reasons, I think that actually lines up perfectly and makes perfect sense with what we're seeing. And, as Baron points out, the Crystal Heart isn't even present. I mean, it is. It's locked up there. He sealed it away. I personally like to think he was a pony at one point and has degenerated, either during the sealing or before that. It's also worth noting, and this is actually really smart and really adult, very mature storytelling, as I like to call it. You'll notice that if we were to treat this fully metaphorical, temporarily blocking out the problem in order to get yourself some breathing room, in order to be able to properly cope, well, that makes perfect sense, right? If Cadence hadn't been casting her initial heal, even though it's not really healing anyone, then Sombra would have just walked in and then the end. Alright, re-enslave, right? So, yeah. And to be perfectly blunt, even in a metaphoric sense, that lines up. Because if you just kind of if you just kind of allow whatever it is that is your problem to just smack you in the face. Actually, funnily enough, I was theorizing that he is actually undead. No, Lord Harrimont. From all that I understand, the answer to that question is no. Unfortunately, most of the Crystal Pony characterization and development happens within these 2 episodes. They will be present in the future, but they will just be another town, rather than, a fleshed-out culture and whatnot. Good morning, Silence J, and thank you very much, Battle Programmer. Very, very much appreciate and obliged. Thank you. If you happen to know where you want to put that, please let me know. Otherwise, I will stab you horribly with donuts. And then enslave all the ponies. By the way, is anybody else... Does Crystal Corn sound really good to anyone else? I'm just curious. Trails of Cold Steel 2. Is that on the list? It is. Okay. Then yes, you got it. Thank you again. I think you're right, Sierra Mike, but it still sounds good. Oh, I wish I could eat crystals right now. Actually, yes, it does, Dream Whisperer. Luna and Celestia are quite old. Although, Luna spent some of that time sealed away, but, whatever. Anyways, let's go ahead and chop off the local recording.